Welcome to the Windows Central Podcast, episode 20 for October 14th, 2016. Hey everybody, Dan Rubino here with Windows Central, also joined by Zach Bowden, and this week we're going to be doing a special podcast, and we have a special guest, and that person is Michael Park, who's the General Manager and Worldwide Head of Mobility at HP. Of course, the reason we're talking to him is this past week, the HP Elite X3 went on sale at the Microsoft Store, and the device is now starting to get into more people's hands. And of course, by the time you're listening to this, our review should be also up on Windows Central, so make sure you go check that out. So we're very excited to have Michael Park here, who was basically the person kind of in charge of the Elite X3. Am I saying that correct? Would that be a correct assumption, Michael?
Yeah, it's great to be here, Daniel. Thank you for having me.
No problem. And so we go back to February when you guys actually announced this device, and now here we are in, now October. Actually, the device kind of came out around September a little bit, but it was a kind of a slow rollout. But you guys had a long process. Not actually, I shouldn't say a long process. We had an interesting process to get here. And so today what we want to do is just talk about some of the general questions about this device, why HP made it, your goals and ambitions with it, sort of the process. And of course, Zach and I will also probably pepper you with some interesting questions about Windows 10 Mobile in general. So start from the beginning, because a lot of people have this question, and I've answered it before, but I want them to hear it from you because some people may not believe when I say these things. But so why did HP even make this phone? Like, you know, there's this, and there's a couple caveats to this, right? So there was obviously Android was an option, you know, and what was HP trying to, like, what was their goal with this device? Like, what was the intention? Like, why even make it with Windows 10 Mobile?
We were looking at the PC business. I joined HP about 3 years ago. And coming on the XP end of life migration, we saw a surge coming to the market that was going to refresh the PC cycle. When we were in the middle of that cycle and redesigning the commercial portfolio to stabilize the portfolio. And if you look at our commercial PCs, we've accelerated our share gains in the last 3 years because we've effectively reinvented the way we're designing PCs. But we looked at the PC business and we're like, look, we can work hard at this and we will continue to work hard to gain share in a relatively flat market. We need to look at the adjacencies of our commercial customers and see what's going on. And what was clear back in that day is that BYO, with regards to smartphones and tablets, was like the thing of how people were getting to more mobility. And we saw this meta-level trend happening where, you know, work is no longer a place you go to. It's really a thing you do, and you do it anywhere. And there was a gap in the user access to how they can be productive at work, be it at home, you know, commuting in an office, at a customer site. And that gap was that, you know, you have all this PC-based productivity in the form factor of a desktop and a notebook. Yet when you're in a mobile environment, you have a BYO device that's effectively just, you know, connecting to Microsoft Exchange to get email access.
Right.
So if you have sort of, you know, BYO as one bookend and PC productivity as the other bookend, we think there's a whole set of workloads in the middle where you have to bring PC-based workloads to a mobile environment. And of course, you know, iOS and Android are trying to do the same thing. But I think, you know, the approach on mobility for a very long time has been very centered on consumer. And we just saw this huge opportunity to leverage the HP go-to-market, the strength we have in operating across 170 countries, knowing how to support the needs of, you know, the largest enterprise to the smallest SMB operating anywhere across those 170 countries. And that's what it takes. I mean, you can't just build a device for commercial. You have to think about the life cycle of the application, the transformation of productivity, and then the underlying device and how you support the app and the device in the way that work's going to change. And so we saw very clearly about 2 years ago that there was an opportunity for us to step in. And that's when we looked at, you know, the different OS types. And in all the research we did, you know, particularly when you look at, you know, the markets segmented by mature and emerging, and you look at mobility-based workloads, we knew that if we just created another Android phone, you know, we would not be able to, you know, keep up against the likes of, you know, an iOS or or a Samsung with all the marketing dollars are driving in consumer. We know that our angle had to be commercial.
Gotcha.
So we built grounds up, really, in thinking about how do we bring to life a productivity experience for mobile workers where mobility is the first priority. Um, and that's, sort of the birth of the concept.
Interesting. Yeah, so I guess that gets into a little bit sort of with, like two, I guess, flags that people raise when we talk about this phone. Is like one, the power of the BYOD, the bring your own device movement that happened in enterprise and in work. And so a lot of people are saying like, people have an iPhone, they have their Android device, and that's what really drove that. And how is HP going to combat that sort of the change in the socialness of like how the people use their devices?
Yeah.
And so, and it's a really interesting thing because my understanding of this was sort of, you go back to 2006, 2007, BlackBerry was huge, Palm Trios were still around, and, there all these smart devices were very enterprise focused. And then the iPhone, of course, came out. Even Windows Mobile, right? Ironically, is coming back to its namesake. But the iPhone came out. It was the first sort of consumer take on the smartphone that really sort of simplified everything. And then we saw BlackBerry scramble, and then Microsoft scramble, and everybody scrambled to try to win that consumer market. And arguably both of those companies had failed at that. And so what we saw was sort of this pullback in enterprise from these enterprise-specific devices. And then there was this push for these companies to sort of adopt these phones and make it happen. But what is your take from companies' perspective on BYOD? Because I think for some of our audience, they see it as like everybody's happy with it, everybody loves it, where my understanding is employees kind of like it and want it, but the employers, when they have to support the IT infrastructure behind it, as well as some of the limitations of those devices, aren't in love with the idea, and they would prefer to have a unified sort of system. Am I correct in that, or do you have another perspective on that?
You are. I have two angles on that though. The first is that there's no silver bullet when you look at when you peel back the use cases of commercial, right? The challenge of commercial is that it's incredibly diverse, right? Like the way a global enterprise operates versus the way an SMB operates totally different. The way an SMB operates in the US versus Sri Lanka is totally different. The way a salesperson in CPG operates versus consumer packaged goods versus a salesperson in high tech semiconductors totally different. And so I think this whole notion of BYOD being the only way to address a problem in this sort of one life of how consumer and commercial come together is sort of naive because there's absolutely going to be a large IB install base of BYOD devices where people just need email access, productivity on the go, simple things because the workload by nature is simple. I could be sitting in a consulting firm that provides, IP level type services where the primary productivity app is Office because they don't have ERP systems and manufacturing systems and things like that.
Mhm.
Um, in that scenario, a BYO device may actually be appropriate. A BYO device might be appropriate for an executive.
Mhm.
Um, but it also depends on the markets you're in, right? I mean, there's you go over to Europe and BYOD is not as well as an accepted policy. I had a very interesting conversation, and this is where I think the X3 will play nicely. Is I talked to one CIO in the UK who said, "Look, I serve thousands of clients, and the primary way I transmit information to those clients with those clients is SharePoint,
Mhm.
and the only way I'm going to let any of my 10,000 employees into that SharePoint repository is through Active Directory authentication. So I'm not going to let a BYO device into the network that way. So if they want to bring a BYO device, I'll give them email. But if they want to actually do productivity around the client, I'm going to have right now the only option I have is a PC." And this individual said, "What I love about the X3 is I can actually bring in a CYO device that's completely compliant to Windows, that gives my end users access to SharePoint productivity on the go. And the combination of the accessories we've created allows them to be productive beyond just it being a phone." And that's my second point is the design point we took on the X3, really, the phone was inconsequential to the overall approach. Um, we knew we needed to make a phone that's great because it has to stand up on a feature set comparison to, the iPhone 7 and to the Samsung Galaxy line.
Right.
But if we just stop there, we'd be dead in the water, because you've got this consumer app adoption issue on the Windows Phone ecosystem that's not going to play well in the consumer domain. So we had to design a whole set of accessories that allow you to flex across, a smartphone experience, a tablet experience, and a PC experience with those accessories that creates the magical moment of seamless productivity. We had to design security. We worked really closely with Microsoft on improving the iris recognition and the fingerprint recognition biometrics, and making sure that the onboarding, when you put your corporate email address into the phone, that the phone onboards into the corporate Windows environment in a beautiful, simple way.
Hmm.
And these are things that we spent a lot of time focused on to make sure that for the CIO, it's easy. And then, of course, you've got the Windows Universal App Platform that's coming. And as people have to think about re-innovating the application landscape as the data centers are transforming and cloud is coming, and these apps have to be rewritten. This ability to sort of write an app once and run it on any Windows type of device is a super powerful one when you think about the options of Android and iOS in a heterogeneous world.
Yeah, definitely. And that's one thing, I've experienced when I've talked with companies behind the scenes about Windows 10, UWP, that some of our audience consumers don't necessarily like get, which is when I talk to these companies, they're all super excited about this platform, the potential of it. And they're thinking, 2, 3 years down the road where all this is going to be and building products around it. And I know a lot of our audience, a lot of consumers are just seeing what's in front of them right now, and it's a bit of a distinction. But companies like yourselves have to obviously think about how this stuff is going to be evolving. Like we've already saw in the last at Ignite recently, Microsoft showed off the innovations coming to Continuum for likely next year for Redstone 2. And it really, even our audience finally got to see like, oh, Continuum is actually starting to make sense now once you were able to, actually do windowed apps, snap things together and have, displays turn off. We've even heard rumors about daisy chaining displays coming. And, all that, once you start to put it into perspective, you start to see the bigger picture here. But that's really interesting points you brought up regarding enterprise, because it's just something our audience and I think a lot of people in the general public aren't privy to unless they work as, obviously a CIO, or they work in a company that deals with this sort of
Yeah,
technology.
yeah. I mean, the other thing we saw too, we did a lot of primary research on the end users.
Hmm.
So, we did. The interesting thing is, I mean, there's a clear focus for where we're going, right? I mean, we looked and said we can't, and we don't want to own the entire commercial mobility market. There's a big part of that that's already there with BYO. What we want to play for with the Elite X3 is one is we want to hit the Windows Phone advocates because there are millions of them in the market today, and there's actually not very many good choices out there. And we think, on the smartphone merit alone, this is a really good phone.
Definitely.
Um, Number two is you have the fastest adoption of Windows 10 happening in the commercial enterprise right now of any Windows OS that's ever been in the past. And the ability to transcend the back end and leverage those investments that commercial IT is making in Active Directory, Azure AD, EDP, Windows Intune, seamlessly with virtually zero cost is a beautiful do you want fries with that play of Windows Mobile with Windows 10. And we have a commercial go-to-market engine that, is the market leader in commercial PCs worldwide. And we fully plan to leverage that go-to-market capability to attach the Windows Mobile dialogue with the Elite X3. And then the third one, which we haven't talked about yet, is to our surprise, when you go out and you talk to companies around the world, the number of employees, like if you think about the labor pyramid of a company, right, where you have
Hmm.
executives at the top and we call them task workers at the bottom of the pyramid, the number of task workers far outnumbers the number of executives. And if you look at the adoption of, iPhone, for example, it's in the it's in the higher echelon of the executive and productivity worker ranks. And it's starting to work its way down, but it's a pretty expensive value prop.
Hmm.
So what we're finding is if you walk into any kind of warehouse or you look at field service or you look at insurance agents in the field, you look at service personnel working under the wing and in the airlines, you look at the police departments around the world, law enforcement, first response, healthcare, any industry you're in, there's like a gazillion people that are still working on paper,
Hmm.
or that have to go to a PC when they do work and they go at the end of the day and they type in a bunch of information. We think that that whole class of enterprise employees can be reinvented by bringing this mobile device where instead of you do it on paper, you digitize the workflow with a very simple UWP app. And as you digitize it, you're reducing the number of errors, you're increasing productivity because they don't have to go to a telex terminal in the warehouse headquarters to enter information, and you're making their life way more productive in the work they do. And so we're working with a set of ISVs and SIs on proof of concepts that I hope to expose to the market over the next year, that will light up the Elite X3 experience and show how we're actually transforming work.
Yeah,
Uh,
that's really interesting. We did at our briefing we had this week. One potential idea here was with police officers who right now have an actual like full computer in their squad cars would have to enter in data and everything as but you can sort of simplify and streamline this process if they would have say that the lap dock, which is both lighter, thinner, and smaller, and also if anyone ever stole it or anything ever happened, there would be actually no data on that device. And that's one thing I think that's sort of interesting with the security angle here. Instead of having to maintain three devices from an IT perspective, you're basically only maintaining one, which is that phone. And so there are a lot of these sort of use scenarios that I think are really kind of have a lot of potential for this, including, of course, medical health fields also have some interesting perspectives too.
yeah, I mean, we just think this is a completely untapped territory, and to do it right, you can't really start with BYOD and consumer apps, right? I mean,
Right.
this kind of play requires advisory services in workflow transformation, change management, custom app development. Um, we've even talked to a company that is a mining company that has thousands of employees, 2,000 feet underground, that's installing Wi-Fi routers that want to bring this with a ruggedized jacket into the domain. So their folks underground are way more productive in the work they do, because we can bring finally in a mobile state, a computing environment that is going to last because the battery lasts 18 hours. It's a rugged, it's an IP67 device.
Right.
It has high speed Wi Fi and LTE. It has all the apps that you need. It can have some custom app development on UWP. It has the docks.
Hmm.
And they're going to build a rugged. They want us to build a rugged jack around. And this is the kind of use case where we are enabling something that wasn't possible before. And I think that's the exciting part for the partner ecosystem to generate huge amounts of value for customers around literally transforming work, modernizing workflows that are currently done on paper.
Yeah, definitely. It's interesting too, just because I've been covering this field now since 2007. I've been writing on Windows Mobile, and it's funny because if you return, it's almost returning to its original Windows CE days, which for those who don't know, Windows CE was what Windows Mobile was originally built on. Before they restarted it for Windows Phone 7 and then eventually Windows Phone 8, they got off of CE. But Windows CE powered so many handheld devices and kiosks and all sorts of other utilities that people just, you know, didn't consider as being part of the Windows mobile ecosystem, but it really was. And now it's nice to sort of see Microsoft kind of pulling back to their roots where they actually have a lot of strength. The more interesting aspect, though, is of course the vision for what Windows Mobile was back in the 2000s versus now. It's like there's so much more happening. Obviously, with the Snapdragon 820 chipset, a lot more powerful, battery efficient. The hardware is definitely improved. You have LTE networks available, and of course UWP. It's sort of allowing this vision to actually come together.
Exactly.
We're still not there 100% yet, but clearly this is the nascent stages of all that happening. I was curious if we could turn a little bit towards the hardware of the Elite X3 because Zach and I both had this device. We've been using it for weeks now. And I've already talked to some other sites who I know are going to be reviewing the phone. And one thing that's stood out is, and you mentioned this earlier too, about how you think this phone is, kind of better than anything else there for Windows 10 Mobile, which we wholeheartedly agree. Zach and I have both used multiple other devices, non-Lumia phones before, and they really kind of pale compared to this device. The choice set for the features and the hardware design, how was that driven? I mean, you and I talked about this a little bit in February, but I was hoping you can like tell our audience in terms of why 6 inches and some of the feature choices. And I've even heard from someone at HP that you guys want to do more originally for this device, but you had to scale back a little bit. So I wonder if you could just talk a little bit about what went into that design process and how did you get it so right out of the gate, basically?
Yeah, I think we put all so number one is we put all of our energy into the notion that we were going to do one offering and do it to the best of our ability. So, focus always pays off, right? And we hired, as we built this BU, this business unit, we hired some of the best talent from outside the market and combined it with a lot of HP expertise in components and supply chain, et cetera. So I'm very proud of the team in terms of what they did. The design point that we had when we were building this was the mindset that we put to product management engineering is think of this as a next gen computing device. If you imagine that the computer actually the PC has to be fitting in your pocket and you have to move this around all day. And the design point grounds up is for somebody that's using this as a working device. What are the core parameters that have to be in place to enable that experience to be just brilliant? And the first thing was battery life. We knew that any productivity worker in today's world who's mobile is going to be working all the time. And one of the biggest frustrations of pretty much any phone today is by the time you hit hour 18 in a day, if you haven't taken a charge, you're likely out of battery. And in all the research we did, 18 hours is sort of that threshold. So the design point we made was this thing from the get-go has to last 18 hours. And you'd laugh if you saw some of the preliminary designs because they were pretty fat. But the fact that the engineers figured out how to make it as thin as they did with a 4150 milliamp battery, I mean, this UI, this ID is only about 7 to 10% bigger than an iPhone 6 Plus.
Right.
But the battery's, almost 40% bigger.
And you have a larger display too.
Yeah, and it's got a larger display. So the fact that the team was able to figure that out is a great testament to their prowess. So we solved that, and then of course when you dock this thing, we put the Qualcomm Quick Charge in it. So you're charging 30% faster than you normally would if you were plugged into a wall, because we know that you're not going to be docked all day, right? So that takes care of it. And then we put a massive battery in the lap dock, a 48 watt hour battery. I mean, and the lap dock, battery is like 40% bigger than the Elite X2, tablet battery.
Mm-hmm.
And so we know that we will take the concern of battery life off the end user's mind. The second priority we had to do was if you're going to be in a productivity environment, the app experience has to be seamless. And so we really, really focused on working closely with Microsoft in the Continuum experience and making sure that we get to a minimum viable product on Redstone 1, as well as future releases of Redstone in terms of what the key requirements are to enable the use cases.
Mm-hmm.
The other part of that was, you are going to need access to legacy apps. And so we worked with the enterprise app virtualization guys, VMware and Citrix, and even Microsoft's RDS, to make sure that you can virtualize apps and use those licenses. We also built something called HP Workspace, which is designed for smaller customers that don't have the resources to do their own virtualization and really just need a point solution to enable x86 running through an X3 in Continuum. And we built an end-to-end service for that. And then the third element was, if this thing is going to last all day, and you're going to have apps on it. It's got to not break, and it's got to be legible, etc. And the interesting demographic that we were looking at when we looked at the commercial users is, you know, the when you did the survey of if you look at it as a phone versus looking at it as a next gen PC, you get a very different answer on the screen size.
Right.
The optimum screen size when you ask somebody about a phone is 5.2 inches.
Hmm.
The optimum screen size when you say PC is like six.
Sure.
Six six is sort of the maximum, just because even at 6 inches, it's kind of difficult if you guys have tried it to move your thumb all the way across.
Right.
So that's the one shortcoming of the experience. But when you turn the Elite X3 on its side in landscape mode,
Hmm.
and you watch a YouTube video for training, you don't need a tablet, because when you actually hold it exactly 12 inches away from your eyes, it is creating the same type of experience as if you were holding a 10-inch or 12-inch tablet 18, 24 inches away. And so what we did was we also optimized with B&O the speakers to create a great experience when you're sort of got it 12 inches away. So, you'll hear a fairly nice stereophonic sweet spot when you're looking at this in landscape 12 inches away, because that's how we optimize the use case.
Interesting. Yeah, I was gonna say the speakers are actually very good on this device, and the front firing speakers I think makes a world of difference from that experience, because it's true when you're holding the device and looking at it, it does hit both ears, and it's definitely more enjoyable, but also just more practical in real
Yeah.
life if you're outside and it's a little bit noisy. You want to be able to hear things.
Yeah. And
Um,
wait till you try the lap dock. The
oh yeah,
lap,
yeah.
yeah, the consideration of the lap dock was to, why carry a Jabra puck if you have a lap dock? So the way we actually engineered the audio on that is fantastic. I mean, it plays as loud from a decibel standpoint, if not slightly louder than a Jabra puck.
Yeah, I did get to hear the sample for that, and it was very impressive with no distortion. And so that's one thing we'll try to pass on when we actually get the laptop for review. That it does crank very, very loud, and and it's really good for presentations. Once again, where you don't need if you don't have access to external speakers, you can just
Exactly.
use this thing. So it's one thing, and that's a really interesting transition, because one thing I really like about the Elite X3 is not just the phone itself, but you guys created this really interesting ecosystem around it. So you guys have three cases for it, which are all really nice. We've already reviewed the portfolio case and the rugged case, and I gotta get my hands on the thinner case. I forget what it's called. And I forgot the name of it, but you create all these cases. You have the charger, of course. You have the docks with it. The desk dock itself is very interesting, because you created the different sleeves for it. So if you're using a case, say the folio case with a cover, this thing still fits on there without having to take off the cover. That's something we actually haven't seen from other companies do, where also now you have this weird, friction point where you need to either take off the cover or not use the dock. And I just really appreciate sort of all the attention to detail that was put into sort of making all this external hardware for it.
Yeah, it was like, it's what I was saying earlier is, the design goal was a seamless user experience. And seamless is not just about the app, it's about how you design the hardware and the accessories with it so that it's truly seamless. And that was new for us, like I can't tell you how many times I'm sure you've experienced as well, where you buy a device, you buy the accessories, and clearly something wasn't thought through.
Hmm.
Um, we spent a lot of time thinking about, okay, I'm a traveling sales rep or sales manager. I have to go visit 20 customers. I'm in the office for staff meetings. I'm doing email in my car. I'm giving a presentation to a customer, and I'm doing expense reports at night. If that's the scenario, let's run through how the whole thing fits together, and let's identify where we hit the speed bumps.
Interesting.
And that was, the new type of work we did is our product managers are not just guys that are speccing BOM and looking at BOM bill of materials and looking at the cost of components.
Hmm.
We have a completely separate team in parallel that was sort of defining the use case for how these experiences have to light up.
It's really cool. Yeah, and it definitely shows. Even the battery life thing, it's no, I mean, you guys aren't being hyperbolic with the battery. Zach and I both comment all the time about how incredible the battery life is on the device. I I've never run out of battery actually on this. I'm great that I always put it on a charger at the end of the night, but when I was traveling recently to Vancouver and I was using it at the airport all day, listening to music and doing all sorts of things, I think I went 15 hours and I still had 30% battery life. And that was just, totally a really unusual experience I've never had with a mobile phone before. And it was really kind of welcome. So, definitely a lot of good stuff there. Let's talk about some of the challenges and ambitions you guys had with this device too. So, obviously, you guys announced in February it was going to have a fingerprint reader, but there wasn't one on the prototype at the time. But that was sort of almost like an announcement since we knew that Windows 10 at the time did not support fingerprints. But what were some of the, the roadblocks you guys faced with it? Same with the iris scanner. The one on the 950 and XL is pretty good. I, heard you guys improved on it a bit. What were some of the changes with those things?
Well, again, coming from a commercial standpoint, the use case has to meet, particularly when you talk about security, has to meet the security concerns of IT, but has to meet the frictionless need of the end user. And, lots of these phones, if you use them, the fingerprint authentication's on the front, on the front button.
Yep.
And, it's like if you're on the go in the airport and you actually have to make a call or you have to dial into a Skype experience, Skype for Business, it's super hard with that thing on the front, especially with a 6-inch screen. So, all of our research was like, okay, we have to have some combination of iris and fingerprint. The fingerprint reader needs to be on the back. We conceptualized the use case, and then we worked with Microsoft to identify what capabilities and drivers are available today and what's missing. Mm-hmm. And a lot of the challenge was just, working with Microsoft hand in hand to understand between the combination of the hardware and the OS, how to unify that in a seamless way. I mean, I think one of the benefits that, that Apple does have is that they are seamlessly integrated between the silicon and the OS and the apps because it's vertical. It's vertically integrated. And I think one of the challenges of Windows ecosystem is they have to design for the lowest common denominator of partners. And so, I think one of the benefits of being first to market in a new category creation, and this is exactly what we're trying to do, is we're trying to create a new category called 3-in-1 that goes beyond just smartphone. You have to be really hand in hand with, the platform partner to do that. And that's been, it's been incredibly rewarding, but it's also hard because we're two different companies and trying to align our goals to where we want to go in support of where Microsoft wants to go is, it takes a lot of work, but it's been a great partnership and we feel really good about it. And yeah, the fingerprint reader wasn't on, it wasn't in the plan. I mean, speaks to some of, I think, the great work Microsoft's done to sense and respond to a market need in a way that, I would argue in the past wasn't so easy. Mm-hmm. There was great work there. I mean, how quickly they helped us enable the fingerprint reader driver technology is just amazing right now. And, we're excited. I mean, the roadmap feels really good. I know the teams, both from our side and Microsoft are working hard on what's to come. It's a bit odd to me, right? Because the partnership and the work we do with Microsoft is so deep. Yet when you sort of go read the press, you'd think, geez, they're just totally walking away. And it's like a night and day experience for me personally.
Right. Yeah, that's something we're definitely trying to work on conveying to our audience is about how there are like two different worlds happening right now. What's happening in the consumer space is one thing, but what's happening here is very different. And so, a couple questions I know some people in our audience had about this phone. I'll try to throw those out there now. So the grill at the bottom, which I actually really like with the B&O and the speaker grill, it's made from, I believe it's a mix of polycarbonate and a plating kind of technology. And a lot of people were like, how come they didn't use metal? And I've argued that, well, metal would have made it bottom heavy, would have thrown off the balance of the device. Also, metal can dent when you drop it. It can interfere with the signals. A lot of times the antenna's at the bottom. But I was wondering if you can explain as to what the choice was there for using a non-metal material at the bottom.
Yeah, you hit you hit the nail on the head. I mean, one is it is a 6-inch device, so weight is a huge consideration given how much battery we have in it.
Yeah.
So I hyper focused on making sure we extract every gram of weight out of the device.
Hmm.
Um, and yeah, the metal cap, it adds a little weight, it dents. This cap that we're using, if it cracks, you just replace it.
Interesting.
Um, so, and it has the way that sort of the component suppliers have actually been able to create the sheen on the finish.
Right.
We were impressed with. Like, I don't think I would have gone with it if we couldn't create a metal like finish that was, a lot of times you get these things and you literally, you rub the dirt off of it with your jeans and it's all scratched up. This
Hmm.
one actually so far is proving to be pretty durable.
Yeah, yeah, I haven't had any issues with mine whatsoever. And I was trying to tell people, I'm like, it's kind of a false like flag. I don't know. It's sort of like I get there's like concern, but no one has had any issues so far with it. So
No.
it's working out very well. Let's talk about the camera a bit. So early on, before there was the firmware update, there were some issues with the camera, and now that they're mostly fixed. But I want to talk about sort of what are the limitations you guys have with the camera? Because obviously Microsoft with their Lumia line, before that Nokia, really did some deep access with their Lumia cameras and made them really good. And I was actually pleasantly surprised by how good this camera is. It's definitely way better than anything we've ever seen from an OEM running on Windows 10 Mobile. And I'm curious as to, are there limitations there? Has Microsoft been pretty good with working together to improve it? Is there any chance that you guys are going to continue to improve, some of the ISO and potentially noise issue and low light problems, or how does that whole process work?
I mean, the camera is a combination of the hardware and the software and the chipset provider,
Okay.
right? So, the hard part of this stuff is that the Nokia team did do deep work to optimize for their products, but it's not easily transferable.
Right.
So we had to do our own deep work on it together with Qualcomm and Microsoft, and then we're continuing to optimize the software stack in the camera app itself. So I think we're not complete yet, and we'll continue to do OTA updates, to continue to refine and improve as we get more and more information. I think the basics are taken care of, but we're still, frankly, we're still learning.
Sure.
You gotta, for instance, when you're recording 4K, you
Hmm.
have to use a really high quality SD card
Right.
that,
Right.
that can manage that kind of speed. Otherwise, the cheaper ones are not able to actually consume the amount of data that's being thrown at it.
Right. Right.
And that kind of stuff is just stuff that we're going to continue to learn. The beauty is the hardware is in really good shape, and this
Hmm.
is largely software tuning.
Yeah, and that's what I've noticed too. I keep telling people, I'm like, the camera is very capable because, and especially like in well lit scenes, it does actually remarkably well. It's very balanced, and even in low light, it actually does way better than I expected. So it just looks like, from my perspective, and I'm glad you kind of said that, software tuning, not so much that the components you guys chose actually seem to be, very good. Even the front-facing camera, which I know you guys have geared more specifically for Skype conference calls, it's 8 megapixel. It also does, really well. I'm comparing to the iPhone 7 Plus that's out there now, and they both look very comparable. The Plus, I would say, artificially ramps up the brightness, but it looks a little bit more fake. So it kind of depends if you want more realistic looking, which I would say is the Elite X3, but definitely interesting stuff there. Oh, and tap to pay. So this is a controversial issue, and I know this is a complicated one because obviously the Elite X3 has NFC, and Microsoft has recently started supporting what they call Microsoft Wallet, which is their tap to pay system. And I'm curious how those two systems ever going to meet on the Elite X3 because I know it requires special firmware for the NFC chipset, special hardware for the NFC, as well as the software and from Microsoft. I'm curious if there's what's going on there.
We built in innate capability into the device, but the NFC capabilities that we were thinking about from the use case was more oriented to do multi-factor authentication.
Hmm.
I think as the tap to pay evolves in terms of what the standard is that Microsoft wants the partner ecosystem to standardize on, we'll certainly move there and support it. But to be honest with you, it wasn't the first consideration point.
Gotcha.
Just because the most of the commercial users won't sort of be in a consumer scenario where it's tap to pay. It's the NFC is to actually exchange information vis-a-vis authentication pairing.
Right. And you guys use it with the laptop, if I recall, to actually pair initially, right?
Yeah, I mean, it's one option that you can sort of work through. We're still, I would say performance optimizing that element.
Right.
I think the biggest challenge we've had is so many of these things that we're doing have never been done before by
Hmm.
Microsoft or by HP. And so, I'd be remiss if I said we got it 100% right. I hope your audience understands that, but I hope we get some credit for, stepping out on a limb and trying to innovate these new ideas, because I think this is where the market needs to go.
Yeah, no, definitely. And that's one thing we've been impressed with is just how on a version one device, you guys not only got so much right, but you're sort of pushing the boundaries of new areas for Windows 10 Mobile. You didn't just slap an OS onto some a phone and just throw it out there. You're like, this is actually a three-in-one device. It does way more. And I think it's been definitely pretty impressive. And I know we're running short here on time, so I just want to close out with just a couple more things. One, I know a lot of people ask about whether or not will there ever be a smaller device? Because a lot of people, like you mentioned about the 5.2 inch, is more ideal for as a phone. Right now, the X3 is a 6-inch device, which I actually enjoy the size of, but not everybody does. Are there plans down the road potentially, if this is successful for HP, to expand the portfolio?
Yeah, I mean, we're market driven, right? So I think the goal was to get the first one out and to do it extremely well and be convicted in the value that we bring to the table with it. And then we'll see how the market reacts. And if there's demand in the market, if we see a demand signal and the TAM, the total addressable market, is feasible for that kind of investment, I mean, I would certainly think we'd want to pursue wherever the market wants to take us.
Gotcha. And finally, what can we expect in terms of any future uh, firmware updates and additions to the X3? I know we saw some early things like the Iris preview. So basically, when you hit the lock screen, it shows you your eyes so you can line it up better. And then there was also the Iris spoofing. We haven't seen that yet in the firmware. I'm curious if there's any other features. And if you talk also a little bit about the double tap to wake, how that works, because that's kind of interesting. Because I think on regular, some Lumias, it's screen technology, but guys are using the accelerometer.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, the accelerometer is quite sensitive, right? So there's a lot of things you can do with it if you write a good piece of software around it. And
Hmm.
we got some ideas that will continue to improve around that as we go out and talk to customers about the use cases. Um, I think the key here is that there is going to be a consistent cadence of innovation refinement that we actually do to this device going forward that'll drop into the OTAs that come from Microsoft. Um, for example, we have one coming in a couple weeks that will, move the nits on the screen from, I think it's 380 net right now, to about 550. It's a software enhancement that activates the higher brightness.
Wow.
Uh, the phone's pretty bright already.
Yeah, yeah. I was going to say
um,
it's a beautiful display. Yeah.
but there are use cases where people need to use it outside, and you want to get that thing as bright as possible,
Hmm.
so that when you're sort of in a daylight experience, you can at least see the screen. Of course, there'll be an effect on that on battery drain, but again, as you said, the battery. I think we've achieved a level of battery life that we can afford to make some of those trade-offs should the use case support it. And so those are things that will, as long as we can sort of optimize within the software stack, we're committed to do that. But we have clear design intent on doing these things. That particular one I talked about is specifically because we want to have a good experience for users who are outside.
Sure. What about a glance screen? Is that something that could be possible with Microsoft, or is that just their own proprietary technology they don't really want to let open?
Um, we've had the conversations. I don't know at a specific level of detail where we are. It is from a customer standpoint. There's different points of views on that. Um, some people don't want to expose things for sake of somebody just being able to read them, and some people do.
Hmm.
Uh, so I think those are. that kind of capability are things that we'd love to see more worked in as options in the overall, bits you can flip in the configurability of the OS. And those, that and many things are things that we're feeding into the Microsoft team, and hopefully they will make the right judgments on how much of that to incorporate into the platform.
Gotcha. It sounds like it makes sense. Well, I think that wraps it up. I'm sorry Zach didn't get any questions in. I'm not sure if he has any. Zach, do
I
you want to
mean,
chime in?
you asked everything I was going to ask, so
Well, then I'm glad you got to listen, Zach. I'd like to thank Michael for joining us. It was really great. I think you really explained a lot of stuff that I've been trying to talk about, but you can obviously do it from a better perspective of having to work with these companies directly and using that more enterprise language, which I'm not as familiar with. But thank you for your time with the Elite X3 and talking about that. And we definitely look forward to covering this device more. Remember, if you guys have questions, just send them to Windows Central and leave us a comment. And there you go. Thanks for listening, everybody. Take care.